Hey everybody, it is You Had to Ask, the show where I answer your questions. And this week, my first question comes from Dudu Bisto, who says, as a trans woman, I've always felt like the way I am ever since I was a young child, and I've never really felt the feeling of acceptance of being a cis male way before my transition. You obviously being a cis male, how does it feel being comfortable and accepting of your own body and identity that of you were born with? It's hard to describe how that feels because it's something that I totally take for granted. It's something that I never really think about because I've never had any reason to think about it. Because the world is arranged with people like me in mind. A big part, I think, of my ongoing awareness and awakening to the issues of like trans people or lesbians and gay folk or people of different races or people of different religious identities. There's anybody who's different from me, anybody who is marginalized or underprivileged or in some kind of a minority or some kind of an out group. One of the biggest parts of my becoming aware of their issues and the importance of paying attention to them and being sensitive to them and listening to them is that awareness of they worry about things that I've never had to worry about. They're faced with issues. They have to overcome obstacles that were never placed in my way. They have to spend real time and thought working on things that I just take for granted. So the question of, how does it feel to be a cis person and to feel comfortable in your own body and to never have your internal feeling of your gender identity or your sexuality or whatever questioned? How does it feel to never be told that the way you are is wrong or the way you are is not the way you're supposed to be? I don't know how that feels because, I do know how it feels because it's the way I've always felt, but it's impossible for me to articulate it because that's never been put on me the way it's been put on you or the way it's been put on other folks who happen to identify outside of what we consider the norm in our culture. And the awareness of that, the acknowledgement of that, the acknowledgement that it is different for me, that I enjoy privileges in that area that other people don't, has been a huge, huge factor in, again, realizing the importance of listening to people from marginalized groups, of taking their concerns seriously, of trusting them when they talk about their own experience and when they talk about how things look and feel to them from their perspective. The recognition that they deal with things that I have never had to deal with, like this, has been very important. So, to answer your question, it's kind of difficult. It's hard to say, how does it feel to be comfortable and accepting of your own body? When I guess it feels fine. It feels good. It's a problem that I've never had, and I'm sorry that it's a problem that you've had, and I'm sorry that the way our society is arranged makes it so that the way you are is a problem for you, and the way I am is not a problem for me. But I think that's the best answer I can come up with at the moment. It's just something I have never been forced to think about. Troubleshooter 125. Steve, I used to watch Murder, She Wrote quite a bit back in the day, but it finally wore me out with what I refer to as the Perry Mason syndrome. Just like Perry, Jessica Fletcher is always right. She always figures it out and her reasoning always works. She's perfect. And I don't buy it. You and I both know that Jessica and Perry both are capable of what they do because the script said it must be so. And I'm sorry, but that resembles real life the way I resemble George Clooney. Even Sam Waterston as Jack McCoy didn't get a conviction every time, not even close. As a result, Jack is a lot more real to me than Jessica ever could be. I get why you like Murder, She Wrote, but in the long haul, I would have liked it better if she had fucked up here and there. Thoughts? You're completely right, of course. She is perfect. Her solution, when she finally comes to sort of what is the ultimate solution to the mystery, she's always right. And yeah, I understand how that can get repetitive and that can make her feel like a flat character. My defense for that would be that as I watch the show, I don't think the show succeeds or fails on the basis of presenting Jessica as a three-dimensional character. I think Jessica works because she is charming and likable, and Angela Lansbury gives a really good performance as her, and you just like to see her and like to watch her. And the hook of the show is the solution to the mystery. not seeing Jessica grow and change as a character or deal with her fallibility or deal with the consequences of her investigation. The hook of the show is who done it, and it's really simple. And that's what I like about it. I like that it's a simple, charming show that isn't terribly challenging and isn't terribly deep, and it's just a lighthearted, sort of charming procedural. And I enjoy it for that purpose. It's something that you can just sort of watch passively and enjoy, you know. And for me, I love it because of the guest actors. I mean, the guest cast, as I mentioned last week, the guest casts are just phenomenal, and that makes it fun for me to watch and to see all these actors that I know from all kinds of other things show up in this series. But yeah, you're right. I think if Murder, She Wrote were made today, or even if it had been created maybe 10 or 15 years after it was, we might have seen more of what you're talking about, because that approach of having the more fallible hero, even in shows like you say, like in Law and Order, where even though Law and Order was very much a by the numbers procedural most of the time, it did allow its heroes to fail and to get things wrong from time to time to sort of keep them human. And I think that was something that came in a bit later, after Murder, She Wrote had already gotten on the air and already found its feet. You know, a great example that was discussed in the responses to your comment in the comment section is House. You know, House is very similar to Murder, She Wrote in many ways, just transferred to a medical setting instead of a murder mystery setting. But yeah, House fucked up every once in a while. House got things wrong every once in a while. Not as a rule, but every so often, House would get something wrong. And there was also, as you mentioned in the comments, Troubleshooter, you know, House himself was a very fallible, very conflicted character. Not like Jessica Fletcher at all. But that kind of thing didn't really come about until after Murder, She Wrote was already on the air. And it doesn't really bother me. I mean, would Murder, She Wrote have been a better show in terms of serious drama if they had approached it that way? Yeah, probably. But I like it because it has a very simple charm. Phil Savage. Steve, how do you feel about people with body dysmorphia who seek out elective amputations of their arms and or legs? Would it be appropriate to allow these kinds of surgeries, or do you think that the desire to have healthy arms and legs cut off represents a legitimate mental health concern? I'm conflicted because I don't think that we should be regulating bodies arbitrarily, but as a communitarian, I find elective amputation to be irresponsible and harmful to the people around you in a way that other body modification surgeries are not. Thoughts? That's a really good question. I, of course, am not at all qualified to offer a serious informed opinion on this. My impression is that I think the difference between other forms of body modification and something really drastic like feeling compelled to have a limb chopped off for no reason other than you have like a psychological compulsion to be rid of it, I think that would probably qualify as a legitimate disorder that should be treated in ways other than just hacking off the limb. That's the feeling I get. I don't know if a professional psychiatrist or a professional doctor of some other field would look at the case of a person who feels that way and say, well, you know, maybe the best thing to do is to just cut your leg off. I don't know. Maybe that happens. Like I'm sort of in the dark here. I've heard of this before, but I've never looked into it enough to see, you know, what is the recommended treatment? People who are afflicted with this kind of body dysmorphia where they feel like, you know, they have unwanted limbs that they need to get rid of. How are they treated? Do they occasionally do elective amputations as a kind of therapy? I don't know. And if they do, I mean, I certainly don't have the experience or the expertise to tell the doctor who decided to do that in that particular case that they made the wrong call. I mean, I really don't know. But my feeling is that that kind of a condition, because you are wanting to mutilate yourself in a way that will harm the way your body functions, that will impair you in a way that you're not impaired already, at least physically, that would qualify as a disorder, and that the best way to treat that would be to try to address the underlying psychological cause of it rather than to chop off the limb. But I could be completely wrong. The Insane Pumpkin Carver. Steve, what do you think of Tim Burton's movies? Do you like or dislike his gothic style and scenery? And especially, what did you think of Edward Scissorhands and Sweeney Todd, if you've seen those? I like Tim Burton. My problem with Tim Burton is not his style at all. I think his style and his set design and the sort of the visual aesthetic of his films We had a discussion the other day about my pronunciation of the word aesthetic. Apparently I say aesthetic instead of aesthetic, so I'm trying to pronounce the TH from now on. I love Tim Burton's style. My problems with Tim Burton as a filmmaker relate to his abilities as a storyteller. I think that his stories, his plots, his characters often feel flat or underdeveloped or sort of overlooked in favor of indulging in the style and the visuals, where his talent really lies and where he really has a great gift. But yeah, I think he's a good director. I like Tim Burton. As for, I haven't seen Sweeney Todd, but Edward Scissorhands I have a soft spot for. I really like Edward Scissorhands. It's sentimental as hell. It is an incredibly sappy movie, but there's something about it that gets me. It reaches me, even though I can tell, like, oh, come on, Edward's, like, he lives alone in a castle, and he's so lonely, and he just tries to make friends, and he keeps running into all these misunderstandings because of his scissors for hands. You know, it's like, it's so sentimental and schmaltzy, and yet it gets me. I can't say too many bad things about Edward Scissorhands, because when I can talk about how silly it is and how manipulative it is, but when I sit down and watch the movie, it gets me. So I really like Edward Scissorhands. Gentle Hum 1. I know you're an MST3K fan, so any opinions on the reboot/sequel coming next year? Did you get in on the Kickstarter, and do you think crowdfunding is a good way to prove to the suits that there is an audience for this sort of thing? Oh, I think crowdfunding is a great way to prove to potential markets, to potential networks or distributors that there is a demand for this sort of thing, that there is an audience. I think with the new MST3K series, that point has definitely been proven. I mean, they ended up raising over $6 million, which is more than they asked for the entire goal. You know, it was higher than their final goal. I'm looking forward to it. I understand the trepidation that a lot of longtime MST3K fans feel about it. I share it. One of the things that I like about Mystery Science Theater, now that it's over, or now that it has been over for a long time, is that it was complete. You know, it was a complete thing. It was, you have your first episode and your last episode, and now it's done. It's a finished work. And I like that. And now it's not going to be a finished work. Now they're going to be adding on to it. So I'm trepidatious about that. But, I love the format. I love that show. I love the conceit of the characters in the show watching the movie with you, that feeling of community that the show creates with you, the viewer, because you're not just watching the movie, you're watching it with the characters in the show. I really love that. And in addition to how incredibly funny it was, how incredibly influential to my own sense of humor it was, and still continues to be to this day, the fact that Joel is the mastermind behind it, I'm really curious to see where it goes, and to see if it's, and look, it'll rise or fall, succeed or fail based on whether or not it's funny. If it's funny, then it'll work. If it's not funny, or if the celebrity involvements become too distracting and begin to overwhelm the humor of the show, or the premise of the show, then that could be a problem. But for right now, I'm really curious to see how it goes, and I'm looking forward to it. I did not get in on the Kickstarter myself. I couldn't really afford it. It's the holidays, and there's a lot of things that I just couldn't afford to throw money at MST3K. I wish I could have. I would have if I could have afforded it. Believe me, I think it was a great cause, but I shared it several times on social media and tried to encourage other people to give to it, and I was really happy to see that they met and exceeded their goal, and I am looking forward to seeing how the new show turns out. Captain Michael, what do you think of Captain America and the MCU? I'm a European, but I find I like him more than the others. His idealism makes him a great foil to some of the more cynical members, and I think the writers do a good job of portraying it as both a weakness and a strength, as well as somehow making a man fighting people literally covered in the American flag not feel jingoistic. I agree with you. I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe version of Captain America is probably my favorite character in the Avengers franchise. I love Tony Stark. I love Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man. I love a lot of the characters. But yeah, the Chris Evans Captain America is just so well done. And like you say, his idealism is so key. I would say that the MCU version of Captain America is the most perfect response that you can offer to people who say that Superman is a difficult character to write. Because the Captain America that we see in the Avengers movies and in the Captain America movies is what Superman should be in his movies. The Chris Evans Captain America is the best example I can think of since the Christopher Reeve Superman of a truly multi-layered, three-dimensional, compelling superhero character who is also a decent person and an idealistic person and a person who is not defined by his demons and his shadows and his inner torments and conflicts, but is a hero because he has the power to help and he wants to help and he wants to do the right thing because he thinks it's important to do the right thing and to do good. And you can have a character with that as his core and still be an interesting character and still have different facets to his personality and still have compelling stories that he takes part in. So I really love the MCU Captain America. And I think I wish that more filmmakers and more studios would realize that idealistic superheroes, old-fashioned superheroes that have, motives that sometimes are just as simple as I have the power to help people and I want to help people, that can be the start of a really compelling character. I think too often nowadays people try to write superhero characters as dark and gritty and violent and conflicted because they think that's the only way they can make them interesting. And I think the Captain America in the Avengers franchise is proof that is complete bullshit. Matt77 Christian. Steve, I share your love for Superman Returns, so therefore I hated Man of Steel, and by seeing this new trailer, I'm sure I'll have the same opinion about Super versus Bat. My question is, once it is determined that the new movie stinks, that will mean 2 crappy Superman movies in a row. Do you think there is any chance in hell that the movie studio would go back to Bryan Singer and say, get the Superman Returns cast back together and turn this turd boat around and make Superman great again? Any chance? Or am I just jerking off? It breaks my heart to tell you, Matt, that you are just jerking off. There is no way that is ever going to happen. As devoutly and as purely as I might hope that would happen, that is just never going to happen. Even though Man of Steel had a mixed response from critics, and there are quite a few people like us who thought it was terrible, it made money at the box office. It was a box office success. And unless this Batman vs. Superman movie next year tanks, or maybe doesn't tank but significantly underperforms expectations, no, they're not going to go back to the well. They're not going to reboot it again so quickly. They might change direction. They might try to alter their approach a little bit, but they're not going to just scrap the whole thing and restart it again. And they're certainly not going to go back to Superman Returns, because as much as I love that movie and think it's the best superhero movie ever made, I and you are strongly in the minority on that one. And that's just never going to happen. The odds are much greater that some eccentric billionaire who also has a hard-on for Superman Returns would privately fund like the most lavish fan film ever and hire Bryan Singer and and Brandon Routh and Kevin Spacey and Kate Bosworth and Frank Langella and Sam Huntington and bring them all back together and say, yeah, now we're going to do Superman Returns 2 on my dime, and it'll be the greatest fan film ever made. I mean, that's never going to happen either. I'm not going to give you hope for that either. That is never, ever going to happen. That is a Superman Returns nerd dream. But there's more of a chance of that happening than of Warner Brothers saying, let's get the Superman Returns band back together and do another one. I'm sorry. It pains me to say it, but it's never going to happen, ever. There is, actually, I think I can say this confidently, a much greater chance of being struck by the lightning that caused that sound effect than there is of Warner Brothers making a sequel to Superman Returns. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for that, and I'm sorry for this. It's time for
the lightning round. Rapid fire questions, glib and adequate answers.
Victor Baldan, how about Donald Trump? For what? For the host of a reality TV show that I never watch? Yeah, I'm all for that. For anything else? No, not so much. Joanna Roberts, Steve, what is your favorite nonsensical, inspirational phrase? Also, use the word puffins in a sentence. Hey, Joanna, don't tell me what to do. No, I'll do it. Favorite nonsensical inspirational phrase? If the original BBC version of The Office has a bunch of those because David Brent would say them, like when he's doing the performance evaluations in the episode. I think that an episode in season 2, and there's one that always sticks with me when he says to Tim, "As long as we're all facing the right direction, all we have to do is keep on walking." I love that. And also use puffins in a sentence. Okay, I will use puffins in a sentence. Here's my sentence. Puffins are any of 3 small species of alcids in the bird genus Fraturcula with a brightly colored beak during the breeding season. There. I used the word puffins in a sentence. Kevin Logan, who would win in a fight, Donald Trump's wig or Marco Rubio's wig? Neither, because Rand Paul's weird-ass hair would detach itself from his skull and would join the fight, making it a triple threat match. And then it would be Rand Paul's hair that would win the day. It would defeat both the Trump wig and the Marco Rubio wig. Sabrina Loazides Meredith, getting in the holiday spirit. Have you heard any good holiday albums recently? I love Seth MacFarlane's Holiday for Swing that came out last year, and Christopher Lee's Death Metal Christmas album, both great. No, when we listen to Christmas music around here, it's usually the old stuff. When we decorate the tree, we listen to like classic old, like American songbook type stuff, like Bing Crosby or Ella Fitzgerald or Frank Sinatra, Johnny Mathis, Nat King Cole, that kind of thing. Those guys and gals singing like the classic Christmas songs. Not so much like new stuff. I haven't listened to a new Christmas album for a long time, but I'm glad there's new stuff out there. Good new stuff. Yarrow Kassir, I'm getting up to go to the bathroom. Do you want me to get you something from the kitchen? Oh, mate, I would love some paella. I don't have any. You'd have to make it, but as long as you're up. Brian Parsons, Steve, are you still doing an Atheist Reads? Would you take a recommendation? Yes and yes. The new Atheist Reads begins next year. The first episode is scheduled to go up January 7th, Thursday, January 7th. And I already have the books for 2016 chosen, so I'm not taking recommendations for the new series coming up next year, but I'm always open to suggestions for the future. So if you have a book you'd like me to do, please do recommend it, and I'll check it out, and if it looks like it would work for the series, I will add it to my list. Yes, I would definitely take a recommendation. Joseph Fabiano, hey Steve, how often do you actually visit cities like DC or Baltimore? I grew up in the burbs in Kansas City, but have always been more inclined toward urban areas, so I jump at any chance I can get to go to one. Are you of a similar persuasion, or do you prefer the country? I visited the city, both DC and Baltimore, more times in the last year than I have probably in the last 20 years. I've gone to DC a couple of times because this year I became friends with Stephanie Guttormson, and she lives in the DC area. I think actually now she actually lives in DC. So I've gone down there a couple of times to make videos with her, to visit her, and I went to Baltimore earlier this year with my buddy Doc to go to a wrestling show in Baltimore. But yeah, that's the most I've been to either of those, quote unquote big cities for years. So no, I don't go to the city very often, and I don't really feel like a draw to it. I would like to go to DC more often, to go to the Smithsonian more than I do. It's been so long since I've been to the Air and Space Museum, but apparently the attraction is not sufficient to get me there very often. Drew White, what is your opinion of Frank Oz as a director? I really like Frank Oz. I think it's interesting that even though his introduction into filmmaking and sort of what he's best known for is his work with the Muppets, and then his work with effects movies or puppet movies, I think it's interesting that even though that was his entrance into filmmaking, that his best movies to me are the comedies, or the human-based comedies like Bowfinger or What About Bob. I mean, he's made some really funny films, involving just standard conventional human actors, and yet he originally was the Muppets guy. I think it's a really interesting evolution of his career and a great demonstration of his versatility and his talent. I really like Frank Oz. Kieran O'Sullivan. Hi, Steve. Phil Oakes or Bob Dylan? I prefer Oakes. He was a great activist and singer. Also seemed like a decent man from all the interviews I have seen of him. Yeah, if we're going just in terms of protest singers or activists, I would have to go with Oakes. I think he was a tremendous political voice, and I mean, I don't mean to diminish him as a musician. He was a wonderful singer and songwriter. He was just incredible. But I mean, it's hard for me to compare anybody to Dylan. I mean, Dylan is just not only so prolific and so active over the last 50 years, but so much good stuff. Just such an amazing songwriter. I mean, I think just overall, I would have to choose Dylan. But I don't mean to diminish Oaks by making that choice in any way, because I'm a huge admirer of Oaks. Radical Bacon. I was browsing the beer at the local grocery store, and I found that they carry 3 different kinds of hard root beer. I bought some and some vanilla ice cream to make some adult root beer floats, which were tasty. Would you try the hard root beer? Yeah, I think I probably would. I've never had it. I've never had hard root beer. In fact, until you asked your question, I didn't even know it existed. But yeah, I would try hard root. I think a root beer float with some hard root beer would probably be pretty fucking good. Yeah, I would definitely try it. And that is it. The hard root beer question was the last question. That's the end of the lightning round. Before I go, it's time for the shout out. The shout out this week goes to a channel that I actually am surprised I haven't given a shout out to yet. It is a long overdue shout out to my pal, my friend, someone whose work I really enjoy and admire and mostly agree with. It's Captain Andy. Andy and I have been lucky enough to participate in a couple of hangouts together. We've both been guests a few times on QB's podcast, Cubic Dimensions. It's always been a fun time, at least for me. I assume that Andy had a good time as well, and QB had a good time. But yeah, Captain Andy, he's a great voice for progressive activism, for social justice. He made an awesome video recently on Islamophobia that I really agreed with. He made a video a couple months ago on why it's a waste of time to debate with dipshits that I both completely agreed with and also felt slightly convicted by, because I think he's talking about, at least in part, a video that I did recently on my channel where we were doing the sort of thing that he says we should avoid, like debating the validity of the social sciences, which I'm completely on board with him about, and I completely agree with him, and yet I'm also guilty of doing that exact same thing. So I really appreciated that video. And he's a musician, and he makes videos where he both plays music and shares his music with us, and also he has a series on racism and music that he's been doing for a long time and contributing to here and there as the months go by, which is a really interesting series. So I would highly recommend, if you have not heard or seen Captain Andy, to check him out. He's a good guy. He's someone I consider a friend and an ally, and I highly recommend his channel, Captain Andy. Check him out. I also want to remind you, as I always do, to please listen to the Lemme Listen podcasts, because if you don't listen to them, and I mean this to all of you, those of you who listen to them regularly already, and those of you who haven't listened to them yet, if you don't listen to them, Jason and I will cry. We will literally cry quietly to ourselves, because we're both too proud to admit that we have feelings. But we will be crying quietly away from earshot if you don't listen to these podcasts, because we put so much hard work into them. Actually, Jason does mostly. The Lemme Listen podcasts are the product of Jason Harding, my good friend, the creator of Opinionville here on YouTube. There are 3 Lemme Listen podcasts. There is Lemme Finish, which he co-hosts with Finite Atticus. It is a great show. There is American Monsters and How to Destroy Them, the amazing improv comedy podcast that he does that is currently on hiatus after the end of its first season. But if you haven't listened to it, I highly recommend going back and listening to the entire first season in preparation for the second season, which will begin next year. And then there is also Late Seating, the movie review podcast that Jason co-hosts with me. And our most recent review is very relevant for this week, because we reviewed Star Wars. The episode went up last week. It was a great show. And if you haven't listened to our Lemme Listen Late Seating review of Star Wars, I would highly recommend it. So I think there's a new Star Wars movie opening this week. I'm not sure. I think it's this week. I haven't heard very much about it. But check out all of the Lemme Listen podcasts at lemmelistenpodcasts.com. I promise you won't be sorry. I promise. If you listen to those podcasts, you will not be sorry you did. And if you do listen to them and you are sorry, you can go to hell. I'm just kidding. I'm just being colorful. That's it for me, everybody. Please leave a comment on this video asking me your question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next video. So until then, take care, everybody. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like it, share it, subscribe to my channel if you're not subbed already, and also please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.